Well, my name is Darius. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching from. Today we are talking regional integration, and we are talking about its forms and the impact it has had on global trade as well as the global economy is concerned. Um, right away, go to what regional integration is. Regional integration, often referred to as RI, refers to elimination of barriers to the free flow of goods, services, factors of production, and money inside a group of countries, and at the same time discrimination against the rest of the world. We shall be discussing how we arrive to that definition because regional integration goes through under various stages, and at what stage do we achieve that kind of definition. Regional integration is a result of globalization, and globalization is a concept that was highly popularized after the First World War. After the Second World War, sorry about that. And after the Second World War, we saw the formation of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which is known as the GATT, in 1947. And globalization is also a concept that comes from international trade, a concept that you covered in your macroeconomics. You remember very well it comes from the theory of comparative advantage of Ricardo. And the idea of Ricardo was that countries are not in position to produce sufficient goods and services that their citizens want, largely because of resource scarcity. Countries do not have all the resources or inputs that they may require in the provision of such goods. Therefore, there was a need for countries to, integrate such that the world becomes a smaller village. That if Uganda, I don't have a raw material or a resource that produces good A, then I should be in position to trade with countries say China, which is in position to produce that good A, and I can also exchange good B to China, which does not have the resource to produce it. The objectives of regional integration could range from economic to social, political, and security objectives, as we are going to be discussing throughout the various forms of regional integration. However, we need to note that the initial view of regional integration was coming from an economic perspective, mainly trade. And if we delve into a brief history of regionalism or regional integration, there are about 3 waves of regionalism which have swept the world. The first wave was in the 1950s and 60s, or what historians often refer to as the Rush discrimination, that was led by Western Europe, that saw the founding of the substantial European Customs Union. And that model was followed by groups of developing countries in the Caribbean, in the Central America, in South America, in Africa. That's the time the East African community was constituted, and others. But even with the most promising of these arrangements, the East African community collapsed during the 1970s, and also customs unions in most developing countries that were based on these models failed because of one major reason. They failed because they were based on a regional form of import substitution. Therefore, countries were struggling to get a regional market for their inefficient industries or inefficient goods and services, while they were unwilling to buy, the highly expensive and also low quality goods that were coming from the member states. So that led to some conflict that saw most of these custom unions fail. For example, with the East African community, which we are going to discuss, it failed because of these disagreements, conflicts in as far as policy making was concerned. There was a policy shift mainly by Uganda and TZ. Uganda had adopted the Common Man's Charter in 1965, and then Tanzania was embracing more of a socialistic approach, socialism, whereas Kenya was taking a capitalist kind of approach in as far as trade is concerned. So that divergence in trade policy making made the East African community fail, of course, among the various reasons which we are going to discuss. The second phase, or the second wave of regionalism or regional integration, also came in the 1980s when the US departed the GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, on non-discrimination principle, and picked with the NAFTA. The NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement. However, the departure of the US from GATT also coincided with the European Union. The European Union was formed around the 1992, and also it coincided with not a coincidence, but when US picked with the NAFTA negotiations, it led to the formation of the World Trade Organization, WTO, in 1995, which of course replaced the GATT, the GATT GATT. This wave also saw some countries around the world, around the globe, taking the model. We saw the Mercosur coming up in Latin America. It is also a trade kind of regional integration that happens in the Latin America with countries like the Argentina, Paraguay, and the likes. We also saw the African Customs Union coming up with the second wave of regional integration. However, the practical outcomes of this second wave were much minimal, based on the same reasons for failure of the first wave of regional integration. And the developing countries were hesitant to take up these models again because previously they had failed. Even around this time is when there were a negotiation to revive the East African community, and I think the member states had signed, that is Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, but they had not ratified to that idea until 2001. That's when the member states ratified and the East African community was revived. So the issue of regional integration is very critical because it also it accounts for some reasons to why some leaders in Africa have overstayed in power, simply because their idea or their vision is in this line. The other day you saw President Museveni launching his manifesto. He's an ardent man who has always spoken to that idea, and his vision of having Africa get a common market area. He has spoken to it almost on every summit. The third wave was in the opening years of the 21st century, which saw a wave of RTS, in this regard regional trade arrangements, gathering force, and this was led by Asian countries, which previously had been bulwarks of non-discrimination. And of course the coming of Asia was based on their experience, especially after from the aftermath of the 1997 Asian crisis. It was a financial crisis that hit Asia badly, and they also came partly in reaction to the dissatisfaction they had with the Bretton Woods institutions in Asia. Read about the 1997 crisis and how Asian countries were able to maneuver through, and also read about the Bretton Woods institutions and the mistakes they had done to call for this kind of arrangement among Asian countries. We saw the need among Asian countries to form the Asian Monetary Fund, or literally the Monetary Union, such that money could freely move from one country to the other at a lesser risk of exchange volatilities. Here, regional integration happens or operates based on regional economic committees or regional blocs, we might call them. And this is the experience of Africa as of 2015. And we are going to see how Africa has arranged itself to reap much from regional integration. If you consider Uganda, for example, we are in about 3 regional blocks. We are, for example, in IGAD. This is the circle for IGAD, with Ethiopia, other countries, Djibouti, Eritrea, South Sudan, Sudan and Somalia, with Kenya inclusive. We are also in the East African community. This is the circle with Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, Kenya, Uganda. And like we said, this is as of 2015. By then, South Sudan wasn't part of the East African community because it ascended to the agreement in 2016. But Uganda is also part of the COMESA, which is one of the biggest regional blocs on the African continent after the CENSAD. And you can see the various countries that are within those blocks. So by and large, when we are discussing regional integration in the form of regional trade arrangements, we discuss them within the arena of regional economic committees or regional blocks. So forms of regional integration. First of all, the first form is the preferential trade agreement, or which is the PTA, where the tariffs on trade among signatory countries are lower than those on trade with the non-participating countries or countries outside that preferential trade area. So PTAs are majorly formal arrangements of trade among countries that see benefits from trade amongst themselves. But in many cases, these benefits are a result of proximity, or by proximity I mean nearness to each other. Countries which are near each other are able to conduct trade because of two major reasons: lower transportation costs and also the greater possibility for trade transparency. If I'm trading with Kenya, for example, the transportation cost is significantly lower as to when I'm trading with, say, a country like Tunisia, Nigeria, or even Ghana. But also there is some high degree of transparency as far as trade is concerned if I'm trading with a country that is my neighbor. For example, I might know the various resources that prevail on the Kenyan market. I might even have the opportunity to have access to the production or techniques, production models that are being used by farms in the neighboring country. But it may be extremely difficult or nearly impossible for me to know what techniques farms in China use. So transparency is high when countries are near to each other. But when trade agreements are constructed in such arrangement, nearness or proximity, they are sometimes called regional trade agreements. And RTAs are a major discussion of regional integration. And by and large, when we are discussing regional integration, we are referring to regional trade arrangements. And we are saying if it is constructed in such kind of way, it becomes a regional trade agreement, which is RTA. So by and large, by regional integration, we shall be referring to RTAs, regional trade agreements. And RTAs have existed since the 19th century, but we have said in the opening years of the 21st century, that's when we have had a huge proliferation of these RTAs. And speaking from a statistical point of view, I think the world has over 250 regional trade agreements as of now. But what we need to note is that RTAs, regional trade agreements, which are coming in the 21st century, or the newer ones, are going beyond just trade to include aspects of, politics, aspects of defense, aspects of culture, name it. But with this proliferation, this huge number of RTAs, one needs to ask him or herself on whether they are doing a great deal.
0, 7, 8.
What is the
8.
impact?
0.
What is the impact of of these RTAs? What is their major impact on in as far as world trade is concerned? And there has been a huge debate on regional integration and how it has impacted trade. There is a debate on trade creation vis-a-vis trade diversion, which we are going to discuss. Does regional integration really create trade, or it diverts trade? But there are also controversies that have been surrounding regional trade agreements. In one aspect is the contradiction relating to the principles of the World Trade Organization of the most favored nation mentality, which states that no one should be in a position to enjoy preferential treatment in international trade, and also that tariffs should be the same everywhere. But now if you create a preferential trade agreement, then you're creating a preferential treatment to countries that are within that area, which by and large violates that principle of the WTO. But
0,
regardless
7,
of those
8, 8,
regardless
0.
of those controversies, there are countries that still favor RTAs. Most especially in the US, there are select sectors of the economy that are much interested in RTAs. For one reason, because such sectors exploit raw manufacturing costs in the hemisphere, in the Americas, for example, but while avoiding the competition from other international producers in Europe, in Japan, and recently in China. So those sectors in America are reaping much, are benefiting from the raw manufacturing costs, but at the same time they are avoiding competition from the industrial giants elsewhere. So they would prefer regional trade agreement as compared to a multilateral agreement, because if you're to compete with the industrial giant like Japan, Europe, or even China, then you risk losing the market share. And regardless of the contradiction with the WTO, World Trade Organization principles, regional integration is allowed under Article 25 of the World Trade Organization Constitution. But that said, also we need to be careful in as far as equating regionalism with the proliferation of regional trade agreements in such a way that Some arrangements are important, but many other arrangements are inconsequential. And we need to be careful also not to mistake regional integration to mean cooperation between or among countries. And the reason I'm saying that some arrangements are inconsequential is the very fact that at times it is just cooperation between countries and not necessarily an agreement among or between countries. It could be cooperation relating to politics, relating to defense, relating to culture of the settings of the respective communities. And why do we need to be careful with that? Because newer RTAs, regional trade arrangements, have a greater membership diversity. The world is more diverse as it was 500 years back, 50 years or so back, and also more of an outward orientation. Most of the newer RTAs are more of an outward orientation. They look beyond the regional bloc per se, and also seek to go beyond the shallow trade liberalization to include politics, security, and culture, as I earlier mentioned. So, the second category is the free trade area. A free trade area is also a form of an RTA. We are saying when we discuss regional integration, we are discussing it from a parameter of a regional trade arrangement or a regional trade agreement. So free trade area, FTA, is one of that arrangement. Here, nations agree to remove totally visible trade restrictions, for example, tariffs and non-tariff barriers, but are free to determine the level of protection to be applied to goods coming from the third-party countries. And the example there is the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, and the ACFTA. ACFTA is for the African continent. It's called the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Asian is for the Asian countries. Now, the major difference between these two, PTA and FTA, is that the former, which is PTA, envisages or provides for lower tariffs. It's simply a reduction in tariffs for signatory countries as compared to non-participating countries or third-party countries. Whereas for a FTA, free trade agreement, now we are considering a zero tariff. We are removing trade restrictions totally, zero tariff. So that's the major difference. So in the subsequent slides, I shall speak about the ACFTA, which is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. This is an agreement that went into force on 30th May 2019 after being ratified by 24 countries, as the ratification article 23 of the agreement requires that entry occurs 30 days after the 22nd instrument of ratification is deposited with the chairperson of the African Union. Now, ratification simply means submission of consent that a country is taking a certain position, and depositing an instrument of ratification. When he or she is depositing, might think this is money, but an instrument of ratification is simply a document that is signed by a relevant government authority on behalf of the country. It could be the president, who is the CEO of a country. It could be the Minister of Foreign Affairs, or any other person that is authorized to sign on behalf of a country. And it is structured in such a way that you show the name of the signatory, the name of the person signing. You indicate his or her title, whether it's the president, the minister. Also, you indicate the date where on which the document was signed, and it also indicate the place of issuance. Where was it issued from? So the 22nd instrument of ratification, that is the threshold that was required, that for AFCTA to be in place, at least 22 countries should have deposited their instruments of ratification. So on 29th April 2019, Sierra Leone and the Sahrawi Republic deposited their instruments to meet that threshold of 22 countries. So the agreement is also run by 5 operational instruments that will guide its implementation. The first is rules of origin. The second is online negotiation forum. The third is monitoring and elimination of non-tariff barriers. The fourth is digital payment system. And the fifth is African Trade Observatory. So Uganda ratified on 9th. Uganda was the 9th country to ratify the agreement, and the ratification was done on 28th November 2018 by the Minister of Trade, then the Honorable Amelia Chambali. And the trading was due to commence. Trading was due to commence on 1st July 2020, but due to COVID-19, the date has been postponed to 1st Jan 2021. And why is it important? Why is the AFTA very important? We are talking, let's put it into perspective. Sorry about this. Sorry about that. Let's put it into perspective. We have the largest free trade area in the world. We are talking about 1.2 billion people. That's the market. And we are talking about a combined GDP of 3.4 trillion US dollars if countries were to merge together. But how shall we utilize this potential, this African potential? It will be implemented in 2 phases, and each phase is also informed by 3 thematic areas or themes. The first thematic area is the protocol on trade in goods. There are developments which have been happening in as far as trade protocol on trade in goods is concerned. These are documents that nearly all countries have agreed to, because when you see blue color is where negotiation has been completed. So all these negotiations have been completed. We now have a customs cooperation and mutual administrative assistance, a document that all parties have agreed to. Trade facilitation, there is a document. All these are documents which have been agreed to. Protocol on trade and services is also another thematic area, but the MFN exemption has been agreed to. Annex of air transport, here we are still negotiating on schedules of specific commitments in services. Then the second phase will come into force or into action when we have completed phase 1. This is the barometer, ratification barometer, to see how we have fared in as far as agreeing to the AFTA is concerned. Africa is made up of about 55 countries, those that are member to the African Union, and out of the 55, I think 54 have signed. 54 have signed to the have signed the consolidated text of the agreement establishing the agreement. It's only one country which hasn't. Eritrea hasn't signed to that consolidated text. Out of the 54 that have signed, 30 have complied with the domestic requirements for the ratification of the agreement. And of course, those that have complied, only 28 have deposited their instruments of ratification with the depository, who is the chairperson of the African Union Commission. So like you see where the barometer is, means that the agreement the threshold of the agreement to commence is 22 countries who have deposited their instruments of ratification. And I've already told you that was met on 29th April 2019 with Sierra Leone and Sahrawi Republic depositing. Since then, 30 have complied, but like I said, only 28 have deposited their instruments of ratification. Then this is the thing, the map on how the African Continental Free Trade Area looks like. Here the green, the dark green, those are countries that are full members, countries that have posited their instruments of ratification. Light green, those are countries that have signed but have not deposited their instruments of ratification. It is only Eritrea here in white, which is a non-member. It hasn't signed yet to the agreement. Also, let's put into perspective a bit. There will be a direct linkage between the three regional blocks. The AFTA will connect the COMESA, will also connect with the East African Community, as well as the SADC, South African Development Community, SADC. And this connection is also a bit important. The tripartite free trade area is comprised of 26 countries. All these, when you join the three blocks, with a population of 625 million and a total GDP of 1 trillion. Remember, we said when we connect it with the rest of Africa, we are talking about GDP of about 3.4 trillion US dollars. But for these 26 countries alone, the projected is 1 trillion US dollars. These with the different colors shows countries that belong to different blocks. For example, here where you see green and yellow, those are countries which are members of COMESA and SADC, South African Development Community. Where you see green and this other color, it is COMESA and the East African Community, and where you see this color, it is SADC and East African Community. So these other forms also come as stages that build to the other two forms that I have talked about. And of course, the idea of forming the AFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, was to facilitate or to allow these other stages of integration flourish or work very well. For example, the customs union. This is where now nations agree to remove visible trade restrictions, that is the tariff and quota protection trade and the trade in goods flowing between them, but also to agree to apply a common level of protection against goods coming from the third countries, third-party countries. Those are non-participating countries or countries outside the regional bloc. So customs union is equal to free trade agreement plus the common external tariff. This is the tariff that member countries will charge or will pose on third-party countries. If we consider the SACU, for example, the Southern African Customs Union, among these African countries, then the common external tariff is a tariff that will be exposed or charged on a country that is outside these. If Uganda, for example, is to trade with any of these countries, then it will be exposed to a common external tariff. The fourth is the common market, is also a stage. Now this is where customs union. Remember what we have discussed in the customs union, that it is the free trade agreement plus the common external tariff. So is complemented by free movement of factors of production such as labor. Remember, still in the custom union, we are talking about only the flow of goods, removal of barriers for the flow of goods. But here we are adding in the movement of other things like factors of production, mainly labor, professions, capital, and the business enterprises. The right to work, invest, establish a business in any member country for any citizen is guaranteed in a common market. For example, there are examples to this. The Mercosur, which I told you is in the Latin America, but also the East African community has reached this stage. Factors of production can move from one member state to the other. But when we go to the next stage, here Uganda, we haven't reached the stage of a single market. Now, this is a common market. Remember, we have also discussed what is in the common market, free movement of goods, but also factors of production. This is a common market plus removal of invisible barriers. The other in a common market, we are talking about removal of visible barriers, but now these are invisible for free mobility of goods, production factors, and financial assets. What are some of those invisible barriers? They are the license, the different standards, the certifications, among others. So those are removed in a single market, but we haven't reached this stage because still it is a requirement. These invisible barriers are still apparent in the East African community, where trade partners are exposed to all these kind of charges like licenses, provision of standards, compliance with these standards, and also a number of certifications that they are required to fulfill. Here there are 4 freedoms: freedom of movement of people, goods, services, and capital. And we are saying in the East African community, these freedoms are still halted a bit. So coordination of economic policies is crucial if a single market is to flourish. Coordination of policies in regard to a common trade policy, agriculture and fisheries policies, regional development policy, among others. Again, with the East African community, we haven't reached that coordination. We are talking regional integration, but our domestic economic policies are talking a different language. For example, we have the Buy Uganda, Build Uganda, Bubu policy, which is by and large an inward-looking policy that mainly looks at import substitution and also the issue to do with the local content. So the 6th stage is monetary union. This is a single market. We have also already discussed what is in a single market, but at this stage we add free mobility of money without exchange rate risks. This is only achieved in the European Union, which is comprised of 28 member countries, but a monetary union is operating only among 19 member countries, or the so-called Euro zone states. Take interest and read about the European Union and the Eurozone states and how that monetary union is operating. This was also the initiative to get the Asian Monetary Union or Asian Monetary Fund. Then the 7th stage is economic union, which is a monetary union plus common economic policies. Remember, these things are a culmination of removals or of agreements in as far as trade is concerned. We have already seen what is involved in monetary union. Right from a preferential trade agreement to a monetary union, there are things which we have discussed. So all of those things are maintained, and then they add a common economic policy. Under the economic union, there are joint policies, for example, on agriculture, on regional development, on R&D, research and development, among others. But again, this is still a wish for the East African community, because we have said we don't have coordination in as far as economic policies are concerned. We still run individual domestic economic policies, which are in many circumstances contradicting the idea of regionalism. The last is the political union, and at this stage it includes economic union, but then we add joint non-economic policies. So here we go beyond the economics and include issues to do with the defense, issues to do with foreign policy, issues to do with human rights, issues to do with environment, immigration, and among others. So a political union has, or a federation has, a common executive body, has a legislative body, parliament, the justice or courts, and the budget. There are strides to achieve that, a political union, but there are other missing things we haven't achieved. For example, the East African community has a federation with a whole executive body. I don't know who is now the head. I think it could be Paul Kagame. Then the legislative body, the parliament, that is the East African parliament. There are also East African courts and also the budget. The East African parliament usually passes its independent budget, and you know Uganda also has representatives or members on the East African parliament. There are a summary of 5 key stages of regional integration. This is also to take us back because the initial developments in as far as regional integration is concerned viewed it from a 5-stage kind of perspective, mainly because they were majorly concerned with economics. But we are saying with the newer regional trade agreements that are coming up, beginning with the 21st century, we are saying regional trade arrangements or agreements have gone beyond economics to politics and other issues, and that's why the stage is now increased to 8. But this is the conventional kind of, perspective that was advanced by authors, that moves from a free trade agreement to a customs union to a common market to an economic union to a political union. But in there we saw other kinds of stages like the single market and the alike. Why regional integration? Trade creation is one of the reasons why regional integration was put forth. That regional integration may reduce prices of goods due to tariff removal, which increases demand and welfare. This is the mainstream or basic economics that we are all aware of. We know with the tariff, whenever a tariff is charged on a good, it increases operational costs or production costs, which in turn tend to push the prices of that commodity upwards. But when that tariff is removed, the rule of thumb is that the price will reduce. No, cost of production will reduce, price will reduce, and that will increase demand. And when demand increases, consumer surplus also tends to increase, thus the justification for increased welfare of the consumers. It also leads to economies of scale. Those are advantages in terms of reduced average costs that partners or producers within the area face. And these usually come with the large scale production if farms in the region are big, and they are enjoying those reduced average cost advantages. it is due to a larger market, because when countries come together, agree on a common principle, then the market area widens up, and partners will enjoy those economies of scale. It also creates competition, which raises efficiency, and efficiency is always accompanied with good quality of the goods and services that the citizens will enjoy. It also removes non-tariff barriers to trade, like we have discussed under the different stages. Beyond tariffs, there are other things that removed in as far as trade is concerned. Things like licenses, standard certifications, among others. It may also encourage technological change, because diffusion becomes easier. Technology from Kenya combining with technology in Uganda, diffusing, that creates some kind of technological change. Different producers are bringing in different techniques of production, different modes, different formulas. Generally, the technique of production changes with the regional integration, which encourages technological change. Thank you very much. Have a good time.